It was such a pleasure seeing you on the East Coast. I'm really glad we
Yeah.
got to make that work.
Yeah, I'm sorry we
Um,
kind of got drowned at the end of it. It's the freaking rain came bucketing down. I got rained on the whole rest of the day.
well, climate change. What are you gonna do?
Some
No,
rain, you can never
Meg
predict
felt so
them.
bad because she was like, "Oh yeah, Nick, we give you a ride." Just kidding, because the back of our car was all full of stuff, and for the whole
Fine.
ride to DC, she was feeling bad. I'm like, he's fine, or he's dead. One of the two.
It actually worked out because when we went out, like the two of us, like when Meg and I went out of the restaurant, it had
Yeah,
slowed down just a little bit. And I'm
yeah,
pretty sure going out that side door, she and I avoid, and you obviously you went out that door as well. The three of us
yeah,
avoided the like friggin' huge trickle of water that was coming off the front awning that I'm pretty sure John and his fiance got soaked by.
yeah.
So I was pretty much able to just sort of like sprint around the corner to my car and I was fine.
That
But
was
by the end of the day, my socks were ruined pretty much because I was just in the rain because I had to drive to another location a little bit south of there or a little bit south and east of there to check in, which meant first of all that I had to walk around in the rain trying to find the correct entrance where I could check in. And then I had to drive to another location to offload my clothes and toiletries and all that stuff at the dorm. Excuse me. For this residency course I'm taking this week in Baltimore, which again we'll get to.
talk
Um,
about that.
yeah, yeah. For this, starting on Sunday, the what would it have been? Shit, Sunday the 9th, I think maybe.
9th of July. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
Sunday
sense.
the 9th of July. For those keeping score at home, I went to the reason Derwin and I actually were able to meet up is because I was driving to Baltimore to take this residency course, which is a requirement of what's a requirement of the Johns Hopkins Master of Arts and Science Writing program that you take a residency course. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Baltimore. They actually have a second campus in DC where you can take it as well. And then they have all sorts of other campuses where you could take it, not necessarily affiliated campuses, but like other places. Like there's the other resident, they usually have like 2 residencies per summer. The other residency this summer is going to Edinburgh, Scotland.
Wow.
And the only reason I didn't do that one, because I probably could have if I was able to, swing the money. There would have just been another matter of logistics. The only reason I didn't do that one is because the topic of that class wasn't as appealing to me. The topic of that class was like looking into the past of science, which is why they're going to Edinburgh because there's such a history of scientific study and stuff there. The topic of this course that I'm taking is science futures. It's called Science in Action, but it's science futures. And it's like we on Monday we went to the Applied Physics Lab, which is a research like a research institution run by Johns Hopkins for like the Department of Defense and other places like that. Tuesday we went to my stamping grounds, Goddard, and had a like all day long tour basically led by 2 guys, one of whom was basically my boss, like not my direct boss, but a couple levels above my boss.
How did that go, by the way? Because
That went really well.
I remember you telling me how you're the only fella in a class full of pretty ladies, and you're like, and so we figured out that you're doing the thing they all want to be doing already. So you're in the nerdiest school for nerds. You're the big man on campus. Like you found your moment, Nick. This is your time to shine. Like,
Well, they have adopted me as their own.
yeah. Talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm the only male student. There's one other guy, but he's a professor. There's 2 professors, and I'm the only guy student. And some of the students are a little bit younger. Some of them are older. Most of them are around my age. Give or take five years on either side for the most part.
You're 30, so they're either 25. They're between 25 and 35.
Yeah, just about. There's a few that have like basically just left undergrad, which is more common than you'd think, people going straight into master's programs from undergrad, but a lot of them are older. There's actually a couple, I think who are a good bit older, who are like have, or a few who have, or a little bit older, have families and long-term careers and stuff like that. They're just looking to move down into a new field, which is again pretty common from my experience in the grad studies program so far. Obviously, I've only had virtual classes before now, where all the communication was done via discussion board. But pretty much all of the classes I've taken where we when we introduce ourselves at the start of the semester, in this program, that is, there's at least maybe a quarter to a third, if not more so, who are, working adults. And when I say working adults, I don't mean like, oh, well, someone older than 18 who has a career. I mean someone who's like older adults.
Like a grown up, like someone who's 35.
But yeah, it's a very eclectic group. Everyone, there's no two backgrounds in common. There's people from all over the country, literally. There's actually someone from Alaska.
Hey.
And yeah, it's a really interesting group, and it's really nice hanging out with them. Last night, I think I told you this, but I'll reiterate for the sake of our glorious listeners. Last night we convened, I think about maybe 10 or 12 of us, including one of the professors, convened for pizza and a movie, and we watched Everything Everywhere All at Once.
How'd that go?
I think that might be my new favorite movie.
It's fucking amazing.
It fucking rocked. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna tell you the way it hit me, because this has actually been the way I've made many of my good friends, or at least good acquaintances. Maybe not good friends, because I don't know if I was this way with you, because I can't remember. But a lot of the people, like when I was at IUPUI, for example, a lot of the people that I got along with the best, I started off hating. You may remember, I don't know if you noticed this, when we were at your comedy performance, not the one that you didn't like, the one where it was like the graduation performance.
Oh, the good one, yeah.
The good one, the one that you liked with all the other students. There was a guy in the audience who I went up to and shook hands with, and he was there with his son. He was the guy whose son kept getting called out as a youngster by one of the other comics. And trained by one of the other training comics and who's graduating. He's in the front row. You probably didn't even notice him. But that dude, the father of that son who kept getting roasted by the one comic, I had a film class with. And I'm pretty sure he was like a sub driver or something in the Navy. And because I remember him talking, maybe not a driver, but he served on sub, because I remember specifically one day I was talking about how I was watching the clock on the wall, and I was like, well, it's about 10 minutes until there's only half the class left. And he's like, you can't do it that way. You'll drive yourself nuts. Trust me, I was on a sub for 6 months. So, but I bring this up because when I first met that guy and started interacting with him tangentially, through class discussions and stuff, I thought he was really annoying. And I thought he was just a pain in the ass, because he was very confident, and he was very because to a certain extent, if you're really confident and kind of brash and you know a lot, it seems like you're full of yourself, and that kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I ended up being good friends with him, at least for the term of that class.
So you're saying how when you met me, I was super confident and you didn't like it?
I don't remember. I genuinely don't. It's been so long since I met you, and we've been good friends for so long that I don't recall if I didn't like you when I first met you, or if it was just sort of a natural thing. I'm not going to comment on that, because I don't remember well enough to pass judgment. So this will have to be left to our imaginations. But the reason I bring this up is because that type of relationship where you start off hating something and then you just come to love it, because you realize, oh no, the reason I don't like it is because it has a lot in common with me. That's exactly how I felt about everything everywhere all at once. Because I started off and specifically what it was when it was in the boring, I say boring, the stressful like family stuff at the beginning where they're like, oh, our business is about to be repossessed. Our business and home is about to be repossessed. You know, my daughter hates me. My husband is trying to divorce me, or is at least filing divorce papers so we can talk. My father is demanding and never respected me. You know, this is the main character, Evelyn, speaking, obviously.
Life isn't going well.
Life is not going well. All that stuff was just grating on me. I just was biting. I was just gritting my teeth because I was like, God damn it! I don't. It's the kind of stuff that usually makes me tune out when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, because it's stuff that I can deal with in my own life. But yeah, when it's like when the alternate version of her husband comes in and says, "No, Evelyn, you're the special one. You could possibly save the universe." Then it started getting interesting. And it started getting interesting at first because it was escapist, but then I realized, oh no, these two things are making the same point. The boring family dysfunction and the high concept, like saving the universe shit. That's dialectics. You're taking one, you're positing the other, and you're synthesizing them into something. And basically what it's synthesizing is a rejection of nihilism, which really, tickled my fancy, because if there's one thing in this world that pisses me off, it's people who lean into nihilism, like the bad guy character in this movie does.
I'm sorry that when you see that, it reminds you so much of your home, and you hate stuff like that. And I would say that if you kind of look around, you see your rocket ship's taken off already, because you turned down an internship in Scotland, right? Because it wasn't the exciting one. And then juxtapose that.
You're already aware that I turned down. Go ahead.
Like it's 5 years ago. Look at how far you've come.
How far I've come in 2 years.
2 years. 2 years, man. Like, look at how far you've come. I know it hasn't hit you yet, right? In your head, you haven't left the farm. In your head, you're still the weird fucking kid that no one likes on the farm, right? You rub shoulders with the most brilliant people on the planet.
Did you see my picture of me with Michelle Thaler?
Yes. And you've only just barely started. So I get, because I know for me, I had this jet lag of like, and fuck it, this was taken. I had this jet lag of like, oh, I'm just white trash from the trailer park, right? For a minute. And then I realized, no, you stand among giants that save lives in combat zones, and then I realized, oh, for me, when I realized, oh, you're Doc, you're a superhero. You have your own superhero name. People cry out and say, Doc, please help me. And then I would go running for 13, 14, 12 years, however long. I was a fucking superhero, man. And you're just at the beginning of that. It hasn't hit you because you spent the first 20 minutes of Everything Everywhere All at Once, the most mind-bendingly psychedelic movie ever created. And it just look at what you said. You're like, oh, well, if I wanted to think about a shitty life and family that hate each other, I would just look around. You mean look around to the brilliance that you're surrounded with, like the genius that teaches you. Like, I love you dearly as your brother. Sometimes I want to be like, you're one of the most successful people I know, Nick.
Thank you.
Like, I know you don't see it yet, and that's okay.
You got to realize it's not necessarily, at least not, I'm sort of starting to transition. It's not necessarily that I'm looking at my own life, my own family. I mean, part of it comes from being conditioned by that, but it's not necessarily that I'm looking at my own family. It's not looking at just general day-to-day stuff, period. The reason why I love like space opera and Star Wars and Star Trek and all that stuff so much is because you get these characters get to go off and do stuff that I will never get to do. No one from our way of life would ever get to do. Stuff like exploring other planets and venturing to other stars and you know, having
I have a
snorkeling
prediction.
adventures.
I have a prediction.
Yeah.
And much like 7 years ago, when I said in 10 years, you will have a multitude of options when it comes to your dating life. Because after you accept the fact that you are a successful person worthy of love and attention from many, many women, oh my God, the world's going to fucking open up to you. The only thing holding you back is the guy you look at in the mirror every day. And in 30 years, you will visit space sometime in the next 30 years. Maybe it'll just be what William Shatner did when he just kind of like cruised around the stratosphere or whatever for like 10 minutes and came back down. I don't know. But at the very least, they're going to throw you on a rocket and shoot you off this fucking planet for a little bit. Sometime in the next 30 years, you will go to space and you will report back to us. That is a prediction I made.
I'll report back to you as the official divided by zero, or the official blanket Fortress of Solitude correspondent from outer space.
Yeah, you're the senior NASA correspondent for the Blank Fortress of Solitude.
So like in 2051 or whatever, when Derwin Lester is running his successful bookstore / coffee shop
from the moon, but yeah,
I will be on the TV in that coffee shop, doing NASA communications work from low Earth orbit.
Exactly. Yeah, that's gonna happen. That's 1,000% gonna happen. And I will be the godfather to your children. Maybe it'll be stepkids because you're not super into kids. I get that. But eventually, some woman with half a brain and a pretty smile is going to say, oh, look, his stock is way on the rise, and fucking scoop you up, man. That shit's happening. Like,
there's a couple interesting. I've obviously sort of mentioned this when we talked before, but again, for the sake of possible listeners, if this does make it into the final cut, there's a couple interesting women in this group and that I'm with, and at least a couple of them seem like they might be signals. So,
talk to me more about this program you're doing at Johns Hopkins.
So the Master of Arts in Science Writing is basically meant to teach. We've actually talked about it a good bit today because there were some folks on who are giving talks to us today who are asking questions about it. Basically, what it's meant to do is if you're someone with a specialty in science, whether you're a nurse or a tech, manager, whether you're a engineer, whether you're a research scientist, whether you have any background in science at all, or whether you don't, it's meant to sort of bring you to a place where you can communicate on complex scientific topics for a lay audience, which is basically what I do at Goddard. That's obviously, I tell everybody, the reason why I got this internship at Goddard is because I was doing the Johns Hopkins program. They don't say it in that exactly in as many words, but they basically say, yeah, well, we have a good relationship with the Hopkins program, so we're proud to bring in students from there. So like, oh, that's what you're telling me is
it's a pipeline.
It's a pipeline, yeah. Because when I first submitted in applications for internships, a year ago April or a year ago March or whatever it was, they didn't know me from Adam. So I was just some dude with maybe slightly above average credentials and in a good master's program, but they decided to reach out to me, and apparently through talking with me they were impressed enough to bring me on for internship. And since then I've impressed them enough for them to ask me back now 4 times technically, if we include the 5th one back for. But going back to the science writing program, the point of the science writing program is it's kind of like it's science writing. Basically, to explain the program, you have to explain what science writing is. And science writing at its heart is essentially a form of journalism. It's sort of at the crux of journalism and science and communications, where you can do stuff like social media, you can do stuff like live news, even, which we do at Goddard. You can do other things like that, but the primary thing that I do, obviously, as a science writer and as a science writer at Goddard is I interview scientists, I read scientific papers, I research these scientific topics on the internet to better understand them, and then I draft, edit, and publish articles on these topics. So the point of science writing, as the way I do it, is basically to research scientific topics, interview the specialists and scientists who are working on those topics, draft articles, and then edit and publish those articles. So basically, what that looks like for NASA Goddard is I'm given an assignment. I've pitched a couple. I actually pitched probably the one that's my favorite is one that I came up with, funnily enough. But we meet every week on Wednesday, and my news team, because there's they break the newsroom down into news teams that cover specific topics. My news team meets every Wednesday in the afternoon, and we basically go around the discussion board, whether it's people in the actual physical room, whether it's on Microsoft Teams or whatever, and we just discuss what stories do you have coming out soon? How are those coming along? What's this process? What stage of the process you in? That sort of stuff. It's basically a newsroom.
It's a book.
And yeah, and they'll pitch me an idea. Like just recently, I had one. The head of the planetary science news team pitched me to do a story about how data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is a pretty important mission that's been going on for about 14 years now, basically has mapped the moon better than any other body in the solar system, including Earth. And we're using data from that mission to train Artemis astronauts who are going back to the moon starting next year. Like that, the astronauts who are going to the moon next year are just going to be flying around the moon, but they're using Artemis data to teach them, this is what you might see. This is the sort of stuff you'll see when you look out the window of the Orion capsule, and here's what you want to look for so that you can maybe do some actual science scouting and stuff like that, scientific scouting and things like that when you're up there. So you're not just saying, oh, we flew around the moon, la-di-da. And then obviously going forward, they're doing even more where they're making, I'll call it what it is, they're basically making sand tables out of the lunar surface that are designed to, just you probably get that reference. Some of the listeners probably will as well. To replicate what the lunar surface will look like on a small scale or on a scale model type basis, so the astronauts who are going to be going there can walk around these surfaces and see, okay, this is what it's going to look like when I'm on the moon, in a few months or a year or whatever.
So the missions next year are just going to be flying around the moon, right? It's almost like we're kind of dipping our toes back in interplanetary human travel.
Yeah, it was just because, and again, a lot of people forget, or maybe not forget, maybe they didn't even ever know. Apollo 11, which it kind of makes sense if you think about it because it's Apollo 11. The moon landing was not the first mission to the moon. Apollo 8 went around the moon. In December of 1968, that's when they took the famous Earthrise photo. That's when, the astronauts did that little stunt where they read in the book of Genesis as they were coming around the moon, and the Earth was rising over the horizon as they orbited. The astronauts who are going back next year are just going. There was already Artemis 1, which was I think September of last year, 2022. That is, where they launched a rocket and then sort of launched the capsule that went out and orbited the moon. I think it orbited a couple times and then came back to test out that hardware. They want to test the hardware before they send the astronauts out. Then they want to test sending the astronauts out before they get them to land. Then after they test them landing, they gradually do more and more that way. So
how much of the wheel are they reinventing? Because the last time anybody was even near the moon, was like our grandparents were in their 30s,
That's a good question, because really, there's lots you do have to read.
There's going to be institutional knowledge, but
there's a lot of institutional knowledge, but there is a lot of stuff that we kind of have to do from scratch, because if nothing else, it's not necessarily institutional knowledge, it's just design stuff. Like
Yeah.
we haven't made a rocket like this since the 70s. So
Yeah.
the Saturn V rockets that took us to the moon during the Apollo age,
50 years ago.
yeah, those have not been produced in over 50 years, in almost 50 years, or over 50 years. Even. I think all the ones that were ever made were made in the 60s, and they made a certain number of them, they used them, and they were gone. And I'm pretty sure part of the reason we never built them again is because they lost the diagrams.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, oops, well, we can't make any more. So that's part of the controversy about the Artemis program is we spent billions of dollars on the space launch system, which I'm not going to get into that debate. Again, as a NASA intern, that's not really my debate to make. I don't want to get it. I don't want to get in hot water anyway. But there has been some controversy because they're spending, I think it's like tens of billions of dollars over the last 20 years to design a new rocket, which is admittedly when it was tested for the first time in launch during the Artemis 1 launch, it worked basically flawlessly. It worked well. It was one of the most powerful rocket ever launched so far, and it's looking like it's going to work. But there's a lot of stuff you kind of have to figure out on the fly because, like the lunar landers, that when we go to land on the moon, Artemis, I think 3 is the first one that's actually going to land on the moon after in 50 years. That is over 50 years.
So Artemis 1 is next year.
No, Artemis 1 was last year. Artemis 1 was the one that was last year. Artemis 2 is next year, and then Artemis 3 is slated for 2025.
So was Artemis 1 the unmanned?
Yes.
That circled the moon.
Yep.
And then Artemis 2 is the manned that circled the moon, and Artemis 3 is landing on the moon.
Yep, Artemis 3 will basically be like Apollo 11. They're going to land on the moon. They'll probably do some science stuff. It might be more akin to the later Apollos where they actually did science instead of just landing and planting a flag, instead of taking a couple strolls around and saying, "Hey, we were here. Let's go home." Because as a lover of science, there are some things you could get a little hot under the collar about. And I don't want to say hot under the collar because again, it was a different era. The main point of the Apollo program, when you get right down to brass tacks, was not to do science; it was to show up the Russians. So there's
science is like a really good byproduct.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff you can argue about until the cows come home about the motivations for those missions and whether they actually accomplish anything. Whatever. I'm not here to get into that. I'm not here to start down that road. But the Apollo 17, the last mission to land on the moon, was the first one to actually bring a scientist. They brought a geologist. It was the last mission to land on the moon. They didn't bring a geologist till then.
So all the other ones were like World War II and Korea, like Air Force pilots, right?
Yeah,
like
Navy
they just
pilots, stuff like that. Exactly.
Put them in the rocket and set them up into the stars, and into a lot of it probably. And again, as a scientist, you're like, oh well, I mean, yeah, it's science adjacent, but you're kind of seeing it as a bit of a dog and pony show, and it kind of was. But dog and pony shows get funding.
Yeah, there's again, tit for tat. You look at stuff like there's a very famous, I won't even call it a speech because it's like a whole chapter of the book Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan. We talked about the history and future of human presence in space. Or I can't remember what the exact subtitle of the book is, but it's like it's Pale Blue Dot: A Vision of the Human Future in Space. And he wrote that just a couple years before he died in the 90s. It was after the Pale Blue Dot image was released, which he sort of spoke about extemporaneously a few times, and that gave him the idea for the famous Pale Blue Dot soliloquy. But there's a bit from that, I believe, from that book called "The Gift of Apollo." And the whole point of the chapter, the Gift of Apollo, is he talks about how he posits that again, it's dialectics. He posits how, well, we went to the moon to do this, which is basically to win an ideological struggle with the Soviet Union. We went to the moon and did this, which was we planted flags and showed off our missile capabilities at a time when the Cold War was at its height. But what did we actually accomplish that we didn't even expect to do? Which is, we by just talk about unexpected dividends. You can talk about some of these scientific resources that were heaped up just through the process of creating the technologies to take us to the moon. You look at some of the things that NASA's created over the years. You look at things like Velcro and MRI scans and all sorts of stuff. Again, the list goes on and on. Of course, I don't have it. You don't have it all memorized because there's so much in it. You look at all these things that NASA has created over the years just for the sake of operating itself, that have then found their way into the public domain, basically, because NASA is a public agency, and help people all around the world every day. If you
we record, and this isn't directly tied to the moon missions, but we record a radio show over the magic black boxes that lie in our pockets all the time.
Exactly.
Like, it's just our cell phones and everything. Yeah, I have another question for you, sir.
Sure.
Okay, I've only got about 15 more minutes to do this because I kind of want to end this at 9. We just released the first chapter, the preview of Spacers, the Erebus Effect. How do you feel the release went?
I liked it. I need to go back and look at all the comments. I don't think I've checked it since all the comments came through, because I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But
you're allowed to be busy.
But from what I saw, people seemed to enjoy. They had some. There were a couple critiques, but it's always going to be critiques. None of the feedback we got that I saw anyway seemed to be like decrying the work. So that made me feel a little bit kind of good. So
yeah. What I would, if you do get the time, go back in there, log in as Nick Oakes, and then respond to all the comments too, just for the engagement of it all.
Yep.
But a lot of the feedback that I saw was really good, because I'm locking in much of the book now for publication in 2024. And I know we have a couple chapters where we need a workshop still.
Yep.
But I'm getting there's lots of it where I'm like, oh, well, we can call this done. And I'm going through the chapters again, and I'm doing kind of like a final cursory thing. And I might take out a word here or there, nothing monumental, or maybe oh, well, we missed a word here, or this was from a previous draft, so I need to text Nick, and we'll figure this out. And I'm gonna have a couple of people kind of read through them, but much of it's done. I'm like, oh, well, this is, because at a certain point, my father taught me this, where because I remember the first book I put out was an early version of Veterans of the Bell Run War, and at a certain point I kept rewriting it, and he said, at a certain point you got to call it done and work on the next thing. And I'm like, I think we're just about there.
And that's something about art in general, because say I'm making a map. Say I'm making a map for about some location on Mars, which I'll need to do before too long for the Erebus Effect, obviously, because we want to add one of those. We want to add a map of the locations into the paperback version. But when I say I'm making a map, I could continue to whittle away the flaws or add things that I think improve the map for days, weeks, months, whatever. Every time I have some new idea, or I open up the map and I say, oh, that little spot could be improved. I can do that endlessly. But eventually you kind of have to just let go and let God, basically, and say, hey, if I keep going after this, it's diminishing returns. That's basically what it comes down to. It's the same way with books. It's the same way with any other kind of art form. You just have to, eventually you kind of have to wash your hands of it and say, hey, I'm going to push this out in the world and let other people judge it, because I need to move on to my next project.
And then it's not so much yours anymore. It belongs to the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that first chapter is strong. And because originally when I released it, it had a prologue and a first chapter. The first chapter had, I'm going to say, 6 drafts, right? And that's 3 from me and 3 from you. So it was strong, right? It had been it well thought out, well paced. it was both of our strengths were played real good there. It was well thought out and intricate, but it was tight. And then the prologue had only really had like maybe one, maybe two drafts on it. And so it wasn't really as solid. And in the release, which was great, people were saying, hey, that prologue was kind of, I had to get through it, but the first chapter, oh my God, that was great. I'm like, well, we're going to cut that fucking prologue. That's too easy. Like, I have no issue. and, and, and I'm like, oh, and I felt kind of proud of myself because I did a page one rewrite of what was the chapter 8, then became the prologue, and I'm like, oh, I'll just do it, and it'll be great. And everyone's like, it is not great. I'm like, well, that's too easy. Just take that thing right out. Because I don't really care. I'm not really worried about someone thinking I'm smart. I want to sell the book, And if we got a strong first chapter, goddamn, that'll sell the fucking book.
Where are you in your looking back through it? Because I'm so eager to see what you think of that, what I did with the finale and the epilogue.
You read me the finale. I was laying on a hotel floor in Washington D.C. last week, and when you were reading me I might have been on the couch. Either way, I was in a hotel in D.C. when you were reading me the finale over the phone. And from what you read, I'm like, oh, this is good. This is sad. This is it's good. It hits. I remember it. It sticks with me. It's like a big bowl of soup, like warm soup that sticks to your ribs. No, the finale was good. I haven't read it yet. I'm somewhere in the first 10 chapters still.
Okay, that's okay. Just curious.
Oh yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine because like during the, I'm either editing the audio for Epitaph for Bipeds, or I'm editing what will be the final chapters that we sell for Spacers, the Erebus Effect. And as I'm editing Epitaph for Bipeds, I'm thinking more and more, and I'm like, oh, we're going to put out a free short story once a month next year, right?
Yep.
I don't think we record the audio for each story. I think it'll just be this one time.
Okay.
Because if we're going to make an audiobook version of Spacers, the Erebus Effect, I want to focus solely on that.
Yep. Makes sense.
Because I don't want to, because if I didn't, like have a full-time job, I could focus on all of the many things I want to do. But I want to build a lot off of Spacers, the Erebus Effect.
Yep.
So I should definitely focus all my attention there. So with the release of the preview chapter, I think it went really well. It kind of taught me that I need to form the Blanket Fort Beta Readers Club.
Yep.
So because it was partially, failure is a strong word, but I learned a lot in this experiment where I put it out there. I told everybody I've ever met in my entire life, hey, can you read this and leave a comment with your most honest thoughts? I didn't realize, I thought, oh, you're not, I sent them to a bunch of people, some of them who are not writers. Yeah. And I said, hey, this thing you don't know how to do, or this thing you're not like familiar with, you're right. Can you tell me what you think of my writing, the thing I've been passionately doing for well over a decade, and then write about it in a smart way in the comment section publicly on my website? There's about 4 reasons why that's a bad idea. And I think I just listed them. So I'm like, oh, you're asking people who aren't really writers, who consistent writers, who to be vulnerable on the internet. Of course not. People are assholes on the internet. It doesn't matter. That's my website. I can delete anything I want. But that was a good learning experience. I think it's got like 150 views at this point.
Wow.
Yeah. And which is pretty cool. And that's kind of what I wanted. Is that the 150 views, 8 comments, and then 2 likes, that kind of gives it, a little bit of street cred, a little bit of like, if someone else stumbles upon it for a different reason, they'll say, oh, people have watched, the fact that attention is currency on the internet, and this has gotten a little bit of attention, so people might say, "Oh, it might be worth my time." So that was cool. With the audiobook version, I'm thinking maybe 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 we just really take our time with it, kind of like how we did with the ebook version.
Mhm.
Maybe release it a chapter at a time, 2025.
Yep.
You know, I don't know. It depends, but I'm like, oh, we should. If I'm going to do this, if we're going to do this, let's fucking take our time. Let's do it as best as we can.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, we'll end there, and we'll talk a little bit after. For the
Mhm.
Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin.
And I'm Nick.
We will see you next Monday morning at 0700.